My husband slapped me across the face like a thunderbolt right there in the kitchen. But I didn't scream or speak or plead with him. I didn't say a word, not because I accepted it, and not because fear froze my voice, but because something inside me had snapped clean in two, like a rope pulled too tight for too many years. And the next morning, when he came downstairs thinking I would be standing there like always, quiet, forgiving, pretending the night had not happened, he froze in pure terror the moment he saw who was sitting at my dining room table. The sun wasn't fully up yet. The house was dim. I sat at the head of the table, smoothing the lace tablecloth his abuela left us. Everything was arranged perfectly. The coffee, the biscuits, the fine china. I looked calm, too calm, the kind of calm that frightens a man who knows what he's done. Esteban walked in with the heavy swagger of someone who believes he still controls the house he keeps breaking. He didn't even notice the swelling on my lip or the bruise that had darkened along my cheekbone. He was too sure of himself, too certain that I would stay quiet the way I always had. He reached for a biscuit with the same hand that had slapped me across the face hours earlier, tore it in half, and started telling me how things were going to change in this house. But his words never reached the end of the sentence. The chair beside me moved. Slowly, deliberately. Esteban's entire face drained of color. The half-chewed biscuit fell from his fingers and scattered across the floor. His eyes locked onto the man sitting next to me, the uniformed officer who had arrived before dawn, the man who had listened to my story with steady eyes and written down every detail. In that moment, Esteban understood. My silence the night before wasn't submission. It was judgment. And I was done protecting the man who had been destroying me piece by piece. Before I tell you how all of this began, I should tell you who I am. My name is Camila Soto. I am 40 years old, born in El Paso, raised by immigrant parents who crossed the border with nothing but grit, prayers, and a belief that their children deserved lives with less suffering than theirs. I grew up surrounded by family, faith, and a sense of duty. Duty to home, to marriage, to patience, to forgiveness. I carried those values into my wedding day when I married Esteban Cruz. Back then, he was the man every woman in the neighborhood admired. Hardworking, steady, respectful. The kind of man everyone believed would take care of his wife. And for a long time, he did. Or, at least, he pretended to. I didn't know that the man I vowed to love in front of God would one day become the man who terrified me inside my own home. I didn't know that the steady hands I trusted would one day bruise my skin. I didn't know that my silence would become the weapon he used against me. Everything unraveled around 3 in the morning. The storm outside was loud enough to rattle the windows, but it wasn't the thunder that made me jump. It was the jagged scrape of Esteban's key, twisting in the lock, too rough, too forceful, too familiar. I was sitting in the kitchen, clutching my robe closed, pretending the soft hymn on the radio could drown out the fear I had lived with for years. Esteban stumbled in, soaked from the rain, reeking of cheap bourbon. He threw his keys toward the table by the door, and something shattered instantly. I didn't need to look. I knew from the sound that it was the sunflower-painted ceramic bowl my mother had given me. He didn't turn to see what he had broken. He walked straight toward the kitchen, eyes already full of the anger he kept looking for excuses to release. When he saw me sitting there, he didn't pause, didn't soften, didn't hesitate. He let the fury take over. He yelled about everything: his job, his failures, the house, the bills, the life he blamed me for ruining, even though I had carried most of its weight. I stood slowly, trying not to provoke him. Esteban, cariño, go to bed. Please, you're not well. But that was all it took. One gentle sentence, one attempt to calm him. It ignited him. He grabbed me. His fingers dug into my arms. My back struck the cabinet. My head cracked against the corner. Before my breath returned, he slapped me hard enough to taste iron. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't run. I just looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man he had become. Someone capable of destroying the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. Then he turned his back and walked upstairs, leaving me bleeding on the kitchen floor. That was the last night he would ever lay a hand on me. And the morning he walked into the dining room and saw the officer beside me, he finally realized it too. People often imagine Texas homes as places filled with warmth, wide porches, strong sunlight, sweet tea cooling on a counter somewhere. But mine stopped feeling warm a long time ago. Still, from the outside, no one could have guessed the truth. Our house sits in a quiet neighborhood in Fort Worth, a beige one-story with a red roof Esteban repaired himself years ago. To anyone passing by, it looks like a home built on steady work and steady love. I used to believe that too. When I first married Esteban, I walked into this house convinced I had stepped into the beginning of a stable future. I was raised to believe in marriage the way some people believe in scripture. You honor it, you work for it, and you protect it even when it hurts to do so. My parents taught me that love wasn't easy, that responsibility came first, and that loyalty was the anchor that kept a family from drifting apart. So I walked into this house carrying all of that on my shoulders, ready to build a life with a man I thought I understood. I had no idea how wrong I was. I grew up in El Paso, in a home where struggles were loud, but love was louder. My mama woke before sunrise every day to cook breakfast, humming boleros under her breath. My papa worked 2 jobs and still managed to make us laugh every night at the dinner table. They were tired, but they were united. And I carried that image of marriage with me like a blueprint for my own. When Esteban asked me to marry him, I said yes, because he looked like the kind of man who understood sacrifice. He was quiet, hardworking, and proud of the calluses on his hands. Everyone said he was reliable. Everyone said he would take care of me. Everyone said I was lucky. For a long time, I believed them. In the early years, Esteban treated me well, brought me flowers on paydays, kissed my forehead before leaving for work, fixed every little thing in the house before I even had to ask. We didn't have a lot, but we had enough, and I poured myself into our life together. I worked during the day cleaning homes across the city, then came home in the evenings to cook dinner, wash laundry, and keep our house spotless because I wanted Esteban to feel proud of what we were building. I didn't realize back then how easy it is to confuse responsibility with self erasure. Over time, this home became less of a partnership and more of a place where I held everything together by myself. And when Esteban began to change, slowly, quietly, dangerously, I didn't see it for what it was. I told myself he was tired. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself marriage required patience, and I had plenty of that. I didn't notice how fear crept in, not all at once, but piece by piece. It began with the way he walked into the house: heavy steps, long silences, a tightening in his jaw when he didn't want to speak. Then came the anger, sharp and sudden, over things that didn't matter. A misplaced tool, a late dinner, a forgotten errand. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that every marriage had storms, that mine wasn't special in its suffering. But there's a moment when a woman realizes the ground under her feet has shifted without her noticing. For me, that moment came the night he slammed his fist into the wall because I asked if he wanted more rice. I stood there with the serving spoon in my hand, staring at the crack forming next to his knuckles, and I understood something I had never wanted to admit. The man I had married was disappearing, and someone else was taking his place, and that someone frightened me. I stopped inviting people over. I stopped visiting neighbors. I stopped calling my sister as much because she could hear it in my voice when things weren't right. A woman can hide a bruise, but she cannot hide the exhaustion in her tone. And I wasn't ready for anyone to ask questions I wasn't prepared to answer. So I stayed quiet. I kept cooking, kept cleaning, kept smiling in public, and flinching in private. The house that once felt like a refuge slowly turned into a place where every room held a memory of something he had broken: an object, a promise, a piece of me. But even then, I kept holding on. Because when you love someone for years, the hope that they might return to the person they once were becomes its own kind of prison. Still, even with all the signs around me, I didn't know how close I was to the moment everything would fall apart. I didn't know the storm wasn't coming. It had already arrived. And the woman setting the table for breakfast that morning, waiting for Esteban to walk down the stairs and see the officer beside me, wasn't the same woman who once tiptoed around his moods. That woman was gone. The person sitting in her place was someone who had finally understood that no house is a home when terror walks its halls. It was exactly 3 in the morning when I heard the sound that always told me trouble was about to come through my front door. The metallic scrape of Esteban's key dragging inside the lock, rough and impatient, like even the door had offended him. The storm outside hammered the windows, but nothing was louder than that sound. I was in the kitchen, sitting in my rocker with the radio turned low, trying to steady my breathing. I had been awake for hours because my body had learned too well that sleep was dangerous on nights when Esteban stayed out drinking. When the door finally swung open, he didn't just enter the house. He crashed into it, stumbling in with rain dripping from his clothes, the sour smell of bourbon surrounding him like a second skin. He didn't bother closing the door softly. He kicked it shut with his boot, the bang echoing through the hallway like a warning shot. He pulled his keys from his pocket and hurled them toward the entry table so violently that I knew something had shattered before the sound even reached me. It was the ceramic picture frame my mother gifted us on our first wedding anniversary. The one Esteban always said was sentimental. He didn't even glance at it. He walked straight into the kitchen, and the moment his eyes landed on me, I saw the anger already climbing through him like a fire feeding on dry brush. His face was twisted with frustration he refused to name, and, like every night, he came home this way. He looked at me as if my existence was the source of every mistake he had ever made. "You're awake?" he snapped, voice thick, uneven. He threw his soaked jacket on the chair. "Of course you are. You're always sitting here judging me." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I had learned that the safest thing to do was to stay still and keep my voice steady. "Esteban, it's late," I whispered. "Go to bed, cariño, please." But that single word, please, was the spark. I watched it happen. His jaw tightened, his nostrils flared. The anger dug deeper into his expression, changing him into someone I didn't recognize. "Don't tell me what to do," he growled, taking a slow, deliberate step closer. "Don't act like you're better than me. You think I don't see you sitting here feeling sorry for yourself?" His voice rose, sharper, more violent. "You think this house keeps itself together? You think I don't know you blame me for everything?" Before I could answer, he closed the space between us. His hand shot out and grabbed my arm so tight, I felt the pressure crush my skin through my robe. I gagged from the pain, but he didn't stop. He yanked me up from the chair, shaking me with so much force my teeth slammed together. My head snapped back. The room tilted. His breath was hot and bitter on my face. "You don't listen," he spat. "You never listen. You act like I'm the monster, but you're the one pushing me." My heart was pounding, but I forced my voice to stay small. "Esteban, stop. You're hurting me." It didn't matter. He was too far gone. His eyes were glossy with alcohol and swelling with years of resentment he had never confronted. All of it poured onto me. He shoved me once, hard. My back hit the edge of the counter, knocking the air from my chest. Before I could catch my breath, he shoved me again, even harder, and I flew sideways into the lower cabinets. The corner caught my cheekbone. White pain exploded in my vision. I slid to the floor, dazed, one hand instinctively rising to my face as warmth trickled down the side of my lip. But he wasn't finished. He stood over me, shadow huge in the dim kitchen light, and raised his hand. I saw the strike coming, but I had no strength to move. His palm slammed across my face with a crack so sharp it cut through the storm outside. My head whipped to the side. The taste of blood filled my mouth. For a moment, I didn't even breathe. The room buzzed in my skull like a nest of angry bees. I looked up at him, at the man who once held my face as if it were fragile. And he stared back without remorse, without surprise, without the slightest flicker of the man I married. He muttered something I couldn't hear through the ringing in my ears, then turned away as if he had simply finished a task. He walked down the hallway, steady enough for me to know he wasn't as drunk as he acted, and slammed the bedroom door behind him. And just like that, the house became silent. not the peaceful kind, the kind that follows destruction, the kind that tells you your life has crossed a line it will never return from. I lay there on the cold tile, blood at the corner of my mouth, the side of my face throbbing, my body trembling, but my mind frighteningly clear. Because in that moment, staring at the hallway he had walked down, I finally understood what I had refused to say out loud for years. He wasn't losing control. He had already lost it. And I was next if I stayed quiet one more night. For a long moment after Esteban disappeared behind the bedroom door, I stayed on the kitchen floor, unable to move. Not because the pain held me down, but because the truth finally settled on me, with a weight heavier than any bruise he had ever left on my skin. The house was silent, but it wasn't the kind of silence born from peace. It was the hollow, echoing kind that follows impact, the kind that tells you nothing is the same anymore. I pressed my palm to the side of my face, feeling the heat and swelling, and the metallic taste of blood lingered on my tongue. My breath came slow, uneven, but my thoughts were sharper than they had been in years. I pushed myself upright, feeling a sharp sting down my spine, where the cabinet had caught me. My hands trembled as I grabbed the edge of the counter for support. But inside, something was no longer trembling. Something had locked into place. I walked to the small bathroom near the hallway, turned on the light, and looked directly into the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't the version of myself I'd been clinging to. The patient wife, the hopeful wife, the forgiving wife. She was a different woman entirely. My lip was split open in a thin line of dried red. The left side of my cheek had already begun to darken into a purplish shadow. There was a faint cut near my eyebrow where the cabinet corner had caught me. But none of that is what stopped me. It was my eyes, still, steady, and stripped of illusion. For years, I had avoided looking at myself too closely. I had forced myself to believe that things would change, that Esteban would come back to the man he once was, that if I loved harder, endured a little longer, prayed a little more, everything would find its way back. But the woman in the mirror no longer believed in that version of hope. She believed in survival. I leaned forward, resting both hands on the sink, and whispered, not out of fear, but out of absolute clarity, no mas. Not one more night, not one more bruise, not one more lie to cover the shame, not one more excuse for a man who had chosen cruelty over love. I splashed cold water on my face, wincing when it touched the split skin. The shock of it awakened every nerve, but I needed that. I needed to feel exactly where the line had been crossed. So I would never let myself forget why this night had to be the last one of its kind. When I walked back into the kitchen, the room looked exactly as it had before he hit me. The flower still on the counter, the chair still rocking slightly from where he had yanked me up. But everything felt different. The arrangement of objects hadn't changed. I had. I picked up the towel from the counter and knelt to wipe away the few drops of blood that had fallen when he struck me. But this time, the act didn't feel degrading. It didn't feel like hiding or erasing. It felt like reclaiming my space, inch by inch, tile by tile. I wasn't cleaning up after his anger. I was marking the end of it. When the floor was clean, I stood still for a moment, letting my breath settle into something steady. My back throbbed. My arms ached where his fingers had dug into me. But all of that pain felt distant, overshadowed by the certainty rising inside me. This kitchen, this house, would not be the place where I stayed silent one more night. I moved toward the pantry, opened the door, and pulled out the mixing bowl I usually used for masa. The air in the room felt different, heavier, but clear, like the moment right before dawn when the sky hasn't yet decided between night and morning. I set the bowl on the counter, reached for the flour, the butter, and the baking powder. Every movement was controlled, deliberate, steady. I wasn't baking out of habit or fear or desperation. I was baking because keeping my hands busy kept my mind sharp, and I needed my mind to be steady for what came next. As I kneaded the dough, the pain in my arms pulsed with every movement, but I welcomed it. Pain meant proof. Pain meant memory. Pain meant I would not walk back into denial when the sun rose. I shaped the dough into rounds, placed them on the baking sheet, and slid them into the oven. The quiet hum of heat began to fill the kitchen, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid of the silence around me. I felt anchored by it. As the biscuits baked, I wiped my hands on a cloth and looked around the kitchen. The room where he had broken me. The room where I had bled. The room where I had decided to stand back up. I understood then that survival doesn't happen when a woman runs. It begins the moment she refuses to fall again. Tonight, in this kitchen, bleeding and bruised, I crossed that threshold. I wasn't the same woman Esteban had thrown across the room. I was someone new, someone who knew exactly what she had to do. And when the oven timer chimed softly through the quiet house, I didn't flinch. I straightened my back, wiped my swollen lip, and let the sound settle inside me like a final confirmation. The first batch of biscuits came out of the oven at 4:10 in the morning, and the smell filled the kitchen with a warmth that didn't belong to the night I had just lived through. Butter, heat, a soft, rising sweetness. It should have been comforting, the kind of smell that marks Sundays, family gatherings, calm mornings. But today, it wrapped itself around me, like something sharper. Resolve. The dough had stuck lightly to my hands earlier, and as I rinsed the flour from my fingers, I realized I was washing away the last traces of hesitation, too. I wasn't trembling anymore. The fear that had lived inside me for years had burned out completely when Esteban's hand struck my face. What remained wasn't numbness. It was clarity. I set the hot baking sheet on the stove and heard the metal make a small, bright ting. The kind of sound you notice only when the rest of the house is silent enough to hear your own breathing. My hands, dusted with flour and faint traces of blood that hadn't washed off fully, looked older than they had earlier, but steadier too. I moved through the kitchen with a quiet, controlled purpose. Every step, every gesture felt anchored, like I was rebuilding myself from the inside out, piece by piece, breath by breath. When I reached for the second bowl of dough, my eyes shifted to the digital photo frame sitting near the sugar canister. Alma had given it to me last Christmas, telling me, "Para que nunca olvides lo que te hace feliz, hermana." For months, I'd let it play softly in the background while I cooked. Images of moments I told myself were reasons to stay, reasons to forgive, reasons to endure. But now, as the screen glowed in the dim light and flipped to the next image, it felt like something else entirely. A witness, a reminder of the life I had tried to protect, a reminder of who I used to be. The photo that appeared wasn't chosen by me. It was one that the frame cycled through automatically. It showed Esteban and me years ago, sitting on a small pier near Lake Worth. I remembered that day, the wind warm, the water calm, his hand resting gently on my knee. We looked like a couple who would grow old together. People who saw that picture would believe it. I believed it then. But standing there with a swollen face and bruised arms, the woman in the picture felt like a stranger. The frame shifted again, showing me and Alma laughing in the backyard while grilling carne asada on the 4th of July. I looked carefree, sunlit, untouched by fear. I touched the counter lightly, grounding myself, and whispered, "I'll get back to her." I wasn't clinging to memories. I was reclaiming them. Because violence didn't erase who I was. It only buried me under years of silence. And tonight, that silence had cracked open. I dusted the counter again and shaped the second batch of dough. My arms ached from the assault, each movement sending a pulse of pain through my muscles. But the pain helped me stay focused. It reminded me why I couldn't back down now, not when the sun was only a few hours away. I arranged the biscuits neatly on the baking sheet, not because Esteban deserved anything perfect, but because I needed to create a morning that made sense. A morning where the table was orderly, calm, controlled, the opposite of the chaos he brought into this house. When I slid the tray into the oven, I checked the time. 4:38. The night had felt endless, a tunnel with no exit. But now I could see the faintest outline of the morning forming. And mornings, I realized, were different when a woman had already made up her mind. I wiped my hands, walked to the pantry, and took out the lace tablecloth. His abuela's lace tablecloth. I spread it across the dining table slowly, smoothing every fold with my fingertips. I wasn't decorating. I wasn't trying to impress him. I was preparing the last scene of a life I was walking away from. The table looked peaceful, perfect. A quiet lie hiding a brutal truth. I placed the good china down, one piece at a time, the clink of porcelain ringing softly through the house. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee. The smell rose with steady confidence. For years, I had made sure his mornings were peaceful. Coffee ready, food warm, house quiet. But today, the coffee wasn't for Esteban. It was for the officer I was going to call before sunrise. I checked the oven again. The biscuits were rising evenly, golden edges forming. Beautiful, strong, unbroken. Exactly what I intended to be when this morning was over. As I leaned against the counter for a moment, letting the heat from the oven warm the bruises blooming under my skin, I understood the truth fully. I wasn't staying silent for another hour. The woman kneading dough in the dark wasn't the wife he controlled anymore. She was the woman who had survived everything he'd done and still had enough strength left to end it. The clock ticked past 5. The storm outside softened, and for the first time in years, the sound of the world settling didn't scare me. It steadied me. Because by the time the sun rose, I would no longer be the battered woman he left on the kitchen floor. I would be the woman who stood up. While the second batch baked, the digital frame continued to flip through moments I hadn't looked at in a long time. Not because I forgot them, but because remembering them hurt in a way I wasn't ready to face. But tonight, with my cheek throbbing and the house too quiet, the past felt closer than the walls around me. The photo that appeared showed me and Esteban standing outside his old construction site, the sun beating down on us, his arm wrapped around me proudly. That day, he had become a foreman, his first leadership position. He was sweating, dusty, tired, but glowing with the kind of pride a man feels when he finally sees a future he's been working toward. I remember how tightly he held me, how he whispered that everything was going to get better from here. And I believed him. Back then, Esteban was the kind of man who woke before dawn, who fixed the fence before breakfast, who stayed late to help coworkers finish their shifts. He was reliable, disciplined, and admired by every man on the crew. I fell in love with that version of him, not because he was perfect, but because he was consistent. He showed up for me. He showed up for everyone. And for a long time, I thought consistency meant permanence. I didn't understand how brittle a man's pride could be, or how quickly it could turn into something dangerous. The next image showed our first apartment, the tiny one-bedroom with the peeling wallpaper and the crooked blinds. I could almost smell the arroz con leche I made on that old stove, the first meal I cooked as his wife. We had nothing back then, mismatched plates, a couch with springs poking through, a mattress someone gave us as a wedding gift. But we were happy, or at least, I thought we were. Esteban worked long hours then, and I took whatever jobs I could, cleaning houses, sorting laundry at a motel, helping my aunt sew dresses on the weekends. I remember coming home exhausted, but grateful, thinking that we were building something slowly, steadily, brick by brick. I didn't know that the cracks were forming even then. They were small at first. His frustration when bills stacked up, the way he tensed whenever the job site cut hours for the season, how he flinched when I mentioned saving money because he took it as an insult to his ability to provide. I didn't think much of it. Men carried weight differently. I told myself he was stressed, that marriage required patience, that love meant carrying what the other couldn't. And I carried everything I could: finances, housework, emotional labor, believing that it made us stronger. The next photo hurt the most. It was taken at a family reunion in El Paso. Esteban had been laughing with my cousins, grilling carne asada as he belonged in our family from the start. His smile in that picture was real, wide, warm, the kind of smile I used to see every day. When he posed beside me, he slipped his arm around my waist and whispered, "Mira, mi amor, we're doing good." And we were. We weren't rich, but we had stability. We had a routine. We had a life I was proud of. But life doesn't always break with warning. Sometimes it splits open slowly, silently, like a foundation cracking under years of pressure. Esteban's real breaking point came a few years later, when his company brought in new management. Everything changed overnight. He wasn't promoted, he was replaced. Not fired, but pushed aside, given fewer responsibilities, fewer hours, fewer chances to feel like the man he once was. He told me it didn't bother him, but I saw the way he sat in his truck before coming into the house, gripping the steering wheel like he needed a moment to put his pieces back together. I saw how he stared at the bills on the counter, longer than he used to. How he snapped when I asked if he was okay. How the beer after work became 2, then 3, then bourbon instead. Pride doesn't disappear all at once. It corrodes. And Esteban let the corrosion spread. The photo frame flipped again, this time to the picture of us at a friend's wedding. That night, he held my waist too tightly. I remember the way he drank, the way he insisted we leave early, the way he muttered under his breath about how everyone else was moving forward while he was stuck. I didn't understand it then, but that was the beginning of the resentment he would eventually weaponize against me. When men like Esteban feel powerless outside, they look for someone inside the home to regain that control. I didn't realize I had become that target until it was too late. The next picture was of him and his brothers at a barbecue, laughing as if nothing in the world could shake them. I stood behind the camera, pressing the button, thinking that even if life got difficult, we would get through it the way families do. But family doesn't save a marriage when one person stops fighting for it. Esteban didn't fall apart in one moment. He unraveled slowly, piece by piece. Pride first, then patience, then kindness. What remained was a man who looked like him, sounded like him, walked like him, but loved nothing the way he used to. Not his work, not this house, not himself, and not me. The oven timer chimed again. I opened the door and let the heat wash over my bruised skin. The biscuits rose perfectly, golden and steady. And as I placed them on the cooling rack, I understood something with painful clarity. The man I married lived only in those photographs. The man upstairs, the one who left bruises on my arms and blood on my lip, was someone entirely different. And I was done losing myself trying to bring the old one back. The years after Esteban began slipping from the man I once knew were not marked by one dramatic moment, but by hundreds of small ones. Quiet enough to dismiss if you wanted to lie to yourself, sharp enough to wound if you paid attention. Bạo lực không phải lúc nào cũng bắt đầu bằng cú đánh. Nó bắt đầu bằng cách một người đàn ông nhìn vợ mình như thế. Cô ấy là nguyên nhân của cuộc đời thất bại của anh ta. It began with tone, with sighs, with that edge in his voice when I asked harmless questions like, "How was work?" or "Did you eat earlier?" At first, he would answer flatly, then impatiently, then not at all. I used to think silence was safer than anger, but I learned quickly that silence carries its own kind of cruelty. He started taking longer to come home. On nights he did come home early. He walked in with a heaviness that filled the house before he even spoke. The sound of his boots hitting the floor told me immediately which version of him had arrived: the withdrawn one, the irritable one, or the one looking for something, anything, to blame. And slowly, I adjusted myself around those versions the way a woman adjusts furniture to avoid tripping in the dark. I changed the way I cooked, the way I spoke, the way I breathed. If he came home exhausted, I kept the lights low. If he came home irritable, I kept conversation to one-word sentences. If he came home angry, I made myself invisible. People think abuse is about bruises. Most of it isn't. Most of it is about control, a gradual rearranging of your entire life around a man's temper. It's in how you stop listening to music while you cook because the sound irritates him. How do you fold laundry more quietly so he won't say you're being dramatic? How do you stop calling your sister because he says you tell her too much? How you turn into the quietest version of yourself just to keep the peace for one night. And each night steals a little more of who you are. The emotional manipulation came first. He'd say things like, "You don't understand how hard I work," or "You never support me," even when I rearranged my entire life to hold his together. Anytime I questioned a bill or asked where money had gone, his voice sharpened into accusation. "It's my paycheck too," he'd snap. "Don't act like you're the one keeping this house running." It didn't matter that I cleaned homes across the city, ironed clothes for half the neighborhood, and sewed dresses on weekends to pay for groceries. In his mind, my effort meant nothing. The more I did, the more he expected. The financial control followed quickly. Esteban stopped asking for money. He started taking it. My debit card disappeared from my purse one night and reappeared on the table in the morning with charges from bars and liquor stores I never stepped foot in. When I confronted him once, just once, he slammed a cabinet door so hard a cup fell off the shelf and shattered on the counter. "You don't trust me," he shouted, "after everything I've done for you?" And that was the day I learned to let certain questions die inside me before they made it to my lips. Then came the isolation. I used to meet my neighbor Gloria for coffee twice a week, until Esteban began making remarks like, "She talks too much," or "You spend more time with her than with your own husband." He never forbade me outright. He didn't need to. Guilt does the job quietly, effectively. One by one, my connections faded. The church meetings, the family gatherings, the friendly visits. People stopped asking where I was because I had become the woman who always had an excuse. "Not today. I'm tired. Next week, maybe. Tell everyone I said hello." But inside, the truth was simpler. I didn't want them to see what I had become. A woman shrinking. A woman trying to stay small enough to fit the version of me Esteban tolerated. The worst part wasn't the anger. It was the unpredictability. Some nights he would come home with takeout and a smile, hugging me from behind as if everything were normal. Those nights were the most dangerous because they made me believe the cruelty was temporary, that the gentleness might come back for good if I tried harder. But it never did. Kindness would come for an hour, vanish for a week, return for a moment, disappear for a month. Living with Esteban became a constant emotional gamble, and the house changed with him. Rooms became places to avoid. The kitchen felt like a battlefield. The bedroom felt like a cage. Even the hallway held memories of the way he'd stand blocking my exit when arguments escalated. I learned the sound of danger before it happened. The tightening of his jaw, the way his shoulders squared, the way he set a glass down a little too hard. A woman learns these signs like she learns the alphabet. They become a language of survival. The gradual degradation of the man he once was happened so quietly that I didn't even realize when I stopped looking for him in the man standing in front of me. And the degradation of myself happened just as quietly. I stopped speaking my mind. I stopped laughing loudly. I stopped asking for anything, not affection, not understanding, not kindness. I became someone who lived for the pauses between storms, someone who measured safety in minutes, not days. And yet, even with all of that, I still told myself that leaving would destroy him. I didn't realize until the night he bloodied my face that staying was destroying me. The biscuits had cooled by the time I laid all of this bare inside my own mind. And I felt something shift so sharply it almost made me gasp. I wasn't thinking about hope anymore. I wasn't thinking about forgiveness or patience or endurance. I was thinking about survival. And survival, once awakened, doesn't go back to sleep. It was 3:15 in the morning when the storm outside reached its loudest point. Thunder shaking the windows and rain beating the roof so hard it sounded like fists pounding from the sky. But even that violent weather couldn't drown out the sound I'd learned to fear more than anything. The rough scrape of Esteban's key twisting in the lock. A sound that always meant trouble was coming into the house, whether I welcomed it or not. I sat in my rocking chair in the kitchen, wrapped tightly in my thick navy robe, holding myself the way a person holds onto something solid during an earthquake. I heard the door fly open, slamming into the wall with a force that made the spine of the house shudder. For a moment, he stood in the entryway, just a dark silhouette soaked through with rain, dripping onto the wooden floor like he was shedding the night sins onto the house as soon as he crossed the threshold. His breathing was heavy, erratic, not tired, angry, the kind of anger that looks for a place to land. Then he moved. He kicked the door shut so hard the frame rattled, and with a violent motion, he hurled his keys toward the hallway table. Something broke instantly. I knew exactly what it was without needing to see. The glass candle holder I kept by the door, the one I never lit anymore because Esteban always said the smell bothered him. The crash echoed like a warning. He came down the hall, every step unsteady but deliberate. And when he reached the kitchen doorway, the stove light caught his face. His eyes were bloodshot, unfocused, yet burning with accusation. The smell of cheap bourbon rolled off him, mixed with the bitter scent of cigarettes and rainwater. He looked like a man carved out of rage and exhaustion. "You're up," he slurred, and the accusation in his tone was clearer than the words themselves. "Sitting here waiting, what, to judge me?" I didn't answer. I knew better than to say anything too quickly. Esteban took a slow step into the kitchen, his broad frame swallowing the doorway. His wet boots squeaked against the tile, an ugly little sound that set every nerve in me on edge. "Say something," he demanded, voice rising like a wave preparing to crash. I forced my voice low, steady. "Esteban, you're soaked. Go change. We can talk in the morning." But the word morning was enough to snap him. He stepped closer, rage sharpening his expression. "There you go again," he spat, "talking to me like I'm a child, like I can't handle myself, like you're the one who knows everything. I shook my head slowly, not to argue, but to keep from provoking him further. My hands gripped the arms of the chair because even the smallest movement might be misread. I just want you to rest, I whispered. But rest wasn't what he wanted. He wanted control. He wanted to empty the chaos inside him into the nearest target. And I was the safest one he had, because he believed I'd take it the way I always had. He leaned down toward me, his voice dropping into a low growl. You think this is about rest? His breath hit my face, bitter, hot, reeking of bourbon. This is about you not doing your part. This is about you acting like everything I say is wrong. His hand shot out and grabbed the arm of the chair, shaking it once, forcing me to feel the threat he hadn't fully unleashed yet. I work. I bleed. I break myself for this house, and you just sit. Esteban, please, I said quietly. Stop. But stop was another spark. An insult. A challenge to a man who felt the world slipping away from him. His expression twisted into something crueler, darker. Something I had prayed I would never see again after the last time he lost control. Then he snapped. His hand clamped tightly around my arm, fingers digging into bruises that hadn't even faded from the previous week. He yanked me out of the chair with a force that stole the breath from my lungs. The kitchen blurred. My feet scraped across the floor as he dragged me closer, shaking me once, twice, harder each time. You don't listen, he hissed. You never listen. You make me do this. My heart hammered so loudly I thought he could hear it. Esteban, you're hurting me, I said, voice thin but steady. But he didn't release me. He shoved me, harder than before. My back slammed into the counter edge, knocking the air out of my chest. A sharp pain shot up my spine. Before I could inhale, he shoved me again, sending me crashing into the row of lower cabinets. The side of my head struck the corner. A flash of white pain exploded behind my eyes. I fell to the floor, dazed, barely able to lift my hand to the swelling already forming on my cheek. He towered over me, breathing hard, his face twisted with a hatred I couldn't understand. Not for me, but for himself, for his life, for every piece of failure he didn't know how to face. And then came the blow. He raised his hand and struck me across the face so violently the sound cracked through the kitchen, louder than the thunder outside. My vision blurred. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. For a moment, I didn't hear anything but the ringing in my ears. He stood there, staring at me, chest rising and falling, waiting. Maybe for me to cry, maybe for me to beg, maybe for me to break the way he had already broken inside. But I didn't give him anything, not a word, not a tear. Something in me had died moments before that slap landed, and the part that remained looked at him with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. He muttered something I couldn't make out, then stumbled toward the bedroom, slamming the door hard enough to shake the entire hallway. And then silence fell. Not the kind that offers comfort, the kind that seals a truth so heavy it changes the air in the room. I lay on the floor a little longer, blood warming the corner of my lip, the cold tile against my spine. And I knew with the certainty of someone staring at the end of a long road. That this wasn't just another night of violence. This was the breaking point. The moment a woman decides either she dies slowly or she stands up before the next bruise becomes the last one. I chose to stand. By the time the storm outside began to fade, the storm inside me had already settled into something colder, steadier, unbreakable. The house was still dark, the sky still waiting for sunrise, but I had moved through every room with the certainty of a woman who finally understood she had nothing left to lose. I set the last tray of biscuits on the dining table, arranged the fine china, and smoothed the lace tablecloth with the same hands Esteban had bruised only hours before. The table looked perfect, quiet, elegant, peaceful. But the peace was a lie, and I wanted it to be. Let him walk into a picture-perfect morning. Let him believe, for one last moment, that the routine he relied on still existed. Then, let the truth break him open. The coffee finished brewing, filling the house with a warm scent that didn't match the cold in my chest. I poured it into a ceramic pitcher, set it beside the biscuits, and checked the clock. It was barely past 7. The officer arrived quietly, knocking once, respectfully, as if he knew the weight of this morning before stepping inside. I opened the door without hesitation. He saw the bruise on my cheek, the split lip, the tightness in my posture, and he didn't ask for an explanation. He already had it written in the photographs I'd taken and the statement I'd given over the phone an hour earlier. He nodded, stepped inside, and sat at the table with a calmness that steadied the air. "He's still asleep?" he asked softly. "Yes," I answered, "but not for long." The house remained silent for several minutes, the ticking of the clock the only sound between us. My heart wasn't calm, but it wasn't afraid either. Fear was something Esteban had trained into me for years. This new steadiness, this quiet resolve, was something I had created for myself. And then I heard it. Footsteps upstairs, heavy, unhurried, expecting the day to bow to him the way I once did. Esteban descended the staircase slowly, rubbing his eyes, unaware that the world he knew was already gone. He entered the dining room with that familiar arrogance, the half-awake confidence of a man who believed the events of the previous night would disappear the way all the others had, swallowed in silence. He didn't look at me first. He looked at the table, the biscuits, the coffee, the perfect setting. He smiled, a crooked, satisfied smile, the smile of a man who believed he had broken me completely. He didn't even notice the bruise on my face. He reached for a biscuit with the same hand he used to hit me, tore it in half, and started talking. "Good," he said, mouth full. "We needed a morning like this. Things are gonna change from now on, Camila." But before he could finish, the officer beside me shifted in his chair. The sound was small, but it cut through the room like a blade. Esteban froze mid-bite. Slowly, he turned his head. When he saw the uniform, the badge, the notebook on the table, the color drained from his face. The biscuit fell from his hand and crumbled on the floor. His voice cracked. What is this?" I didn't raise mine. I didn't tremble. I didn't look away. "This is the truth," I said. The truth you tried to bury. His eyes darted between the officer and me, confusion giving way to shock, then to a fear he didn't know how to hide. He took a half step back, as if the reality in front of him was something he could retreat from if he just moved fast enough. Camilla, wait. No, I interrupted, calm but absolute. I waited for years. I waited through the bruises, through the yelling, through every night you came home looking for someone to punish. Today, I'm done waiting. The officer stood, his voice firm, controlled. Mr. Cruz, I need you to stay where you are. Esteban lifted his hands slightly, stunned, as if the air itself had turned against him. You can't do this, he whispered, not because he believed it, but because he couldn't imagine a world where I'd stand against him. I can, I told him, and I am. He opened his mouth again, maybe to beg, maybe to argue, maybe to twist the truth the way he always had. But none of it mattered. The officer stepped forward, took his wrists, and the sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the cleanest, sharpest sound I had heard in years. Esteban didn't fight. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply sagged under the weight of a truth he could no longer escape. As the officer led him toward the door, Esteban looked back at me, confused, betrayed, stunned that the woman he had controlled for so long had become the woman who finally ended it. I didn't look away. Not this time. Not ever again. When the door closed behind them, the house fell into a silence I didn't recognize. Clean, open, unafraid. The storm outside had passed. The storm inside these walls had ended too. I stood alone in the dining room, the morning sun finally breaking through the windows, tidying the lace tablecloth, the untouched biscuits, the chair where the officer had sat. And for the first time in years, the silence felt like peace, not fear, not waiting, peace. And I knew that whatever came next, paperwork, questions, rebuilding, I would face it standing, not bent, not shrinking. I had chosen myself, and that choice saved my life.